Here's a captivating story for you. Homeless boy shows kindness to Keanu Reeves. The next day, his life changes forever. True stories. It was a cold evening in downtown Los Angeles. The city's neon lights flickered, casting long shadows on the pavement as people hurried past, too busy to notice the homeless boy sitting on the sidewalk. His name was Jake, just 14 years old, wrapped in an old hoodie, hugging his knees for warmth. Jake had been living on the streets for months, ever since his mother had passed away and his father had disappeared. Every day was a struggle, but he never lost his kindness. That night, as Jake sat outside a small diner, he noticed a man walking toward him. The man was wearing a black beanie and an old leather jacket. He had a quiet, humble presence different from the usual pedestrians. Jake didn't recognize him at first. The man stopped, reached into his pocket, and pulled out some cash. "Here, kid, get yourself something warm to eat," he said, handing Jake a $20 bill. Jake looked up and shook his head. "I appreciate it, mister, but you look like you need it too." The man chuckled. "I'm doing just fine." But Jake insisted, "If you're hungry, there's a soup kitchen down the street. They're really nice. I can take you there." The man smiled, clearly touched by the boy's selflessness. "That's very kind of you. But tell you what, let's both go in and grab something to eat." Jake hesitated, but eventually nodded. They walked into the diner where the man ordered 2 burgers and hot chocolate. As they sat down to eat, Jake finally realized who he was talking to. His eyes widened. "Wait, you're Keanu Reeves?" Keanu grinned. "Yeah, but let's keep that between us for now." Jake couldn't believe it. He had just turned down money from a famous Hollywood actor. But instead of being embarrassed, he felt something else, comfort. Keanu spoke to him like a friend, asking about his life, listening intently. They talked for over an hour. When it was time to leave, Keanu stood up and said, "Listen, Jake, I want to help you, but not with just money. Meet me here tomorrow at noon." Jake hesitated. "Why? You'll see." The next day, Jake showed up, unsure of what to expect. But when Keanu arrived, he wasn't alone. With him was a social worker, a man who ran a shelter, and someone from a local school. "I made a few calls," Keanu said. "You're a smart kid, Jake. You deserve a chance." That day, Jake's life changed forever. He was given a place to stay, an opportunity to go back to school, and even a part-time job at a bookstore. Keanu checked in on him regularly, making sure he was doing okay. Years later, Jake would tell the story of how a small act of kindness, offering to help a stranger, ended up saving his own life. And Keanu? He just smiled whenever people asked about it. Because to him, kindness wasn't about grand gestures, it was about being human. Homeless boy shows kindness to Keanu Reeves. The next day, his life changes forever. Part 2. Months passed, and Jake's life had transformed in ways he never thought possible. With a roof over his head, food in his stomach, and a new chance at education, he felt like he was finally waking up from a long nightmare. But despite his new opportunities, Jake struggled. School was hard. He had missed so much that he often felt lost in class. The job at the bookstore was nice, but he sometimes doubted if he'd ever catch up to the life he had lost. One evening, as he walked home from work, his phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. "Hello? Hey, kid. How's life treating you?" Jake's eyes widened. "Keanu?" Keanu chuckled on the other end. "Yeah, wanted to check in on you." Jake hesitated before sighing. "I don't know. It's tough. I feel like I'm so far behind, like I don't belong in this new life." Keanu was silent for a moment, then said, "You know, when I was young, I struggled too. I moved around a lot, didn't have a stable home, and school wasn't easy for me either. But I kept going. You don't have to be perfect, Jake. You just have to keep moving forward." Jake smiled slightly. "You really think I can do this?" "I don't think, kid. I know you can." That call gave Jake the push he needed. He worked harder in school, asked for help when he needed it, and refused to give up. A few years later, he graduated high school, something he once thought was impossible. On the day of his graduation, as he stood on stage in his cap and gown, he scanned the crowd. His heart skipped a beat when he saw a familiar face in the back. Keanu Reeves. The actor gave him a thumbs up and a proud smile. After the ceremony, Jake ran up to him. "You came." "Of course," Keanu said. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." Jake grinned. "You know, one day I want to help kids like me that have just like you helped me." Keanu put a hand on his shoulder. Then you already know the most important lesson. Kindness changes lives. Keep that in your heart, and you'll go far, Jake. And he did. Years later, Jake became a youth counsellor, helping homeless kids find shelter, education, and hope, just as Keanu had done for him. Because one small act of kindness can change a life forever. The end. Would you like me to add an epilogue or expand the story in another direction? Homeless boy shows kindness to Keanu Reeves. The next day, his life changes forever. Part 3. The legacy continues. Years passed and Jake grew into a man with a mission. No longer the scared, homeless boy on the streets, he was now a youth counsellor, dedicating his life to helping kids who had been in the same position he once was. He worked at a non-profit that provided shelter, education, and mentorship to homeless and at-risk youth. One evening, as Jake sat at his small office desk, his phone buzzed. He smiled when he saw the name on the screen. Keanu Reeves. "Hey, old man," Jake teased as he answered. Keanu chuckled. "Watch it, kid. I can still outrun you." Jake laughed. "Doubt it. What's up?" "I heard about the work you've been doing," Keanu said. "You're making a real difference, Jake." Jake leaned back in his chair, exhaling. "I'm just doing what you did for me, Keanu. These kids need someone to believe in them." Keanu was silent for a moment, then said, "I've been thinking, what if we did something bigger?" Jake sat up. "Bigger. I want to help fund a new shelter, a place where kids don't just get a bed for the night, but real opportunities. Education, job training, therapy, whatever they need to turn their lives around. And I want you to run it." Jake's breath caught in his throat. "Keanu, that's huge." Keanu's voice was warm. "So was the change in your life, Jake, and that all started because you showed kindness to a stranger. Imagine what we could do if we gave more kids that same chance." Tears welled in Jake's eyes. He thought about the cold nights he had spent on the streets, the loneliness, the hunger, and then he thought about the moment Keanu had sat down with him in that diner. That single act of kindness had changed everything. Jake swallowed hard and nodded, even though Keanu couldn't see him. "Let's do it." 1 year later. The grand opening of the Reeves Hope Center was a moment Jake would never forget. The building stood tall and bright, filled with warmth and promise. Kids who had once felt invisible now had a place to call home. The media covered the event, calling it Keanu Reeves' biggest act of kindness yet. But Keanu, standing beside Jake as they cut the ribbon, simply shrugged and said, "This isn't about me. This is about Jake, and about every kid out there who just needs someone to believe in them." As the crowd applauded, Jake turned to Keanu and grinned. "You know, I still can't believe this all started because I tried to help you that night." Keanu smiled back. "Funny how kindness works, huh? It always comes full circle." Jake looked out at the kids entering their new home, their eyes filled with hope. He knew then that his journey wasn't just about surviving, it was about giving back. Because kindness wasn't just an act, it was a legacy, and their story was just the beginning. The end, or rather a new beginning. Hope you loved the full story. Let me know if you want any tweaks or extra scenes. Homeless boy shows kindness to Keanu Reeves. The next day, his life changes forever. Part 4. A new beginning. Months after the grand opening of the Reeves Hope Center, Jake found himself busier than ever. The shelter was thriving. Dozens of kids had already found a safe place to sleep, mentors to guide them, and opportunities to rebuild their futures. But Jake knew that the work was just beginning. One evening, as he was locking up the center, he noticed a boy sitting alone on the steps outside. He looked about 13, his clothes tattered, his face full of exhaustion and sadness. The sight immediately brought Jake back to his own past. Jake approached slowly. "Hey there, bud. You okay?" The boy looked up, his eyes wary. "I'm fine." Jake sat beside him. "You remind me of someone I used to know. He was alone, too. Thought the world had given up on him." The boy scoffed. "What happened to him?" Jake smiled. "He met someone who believed in him, and it changed his life." The boy was silent for a long moment before finally whispering, "I don't have anywhere to go." Jake patted his shoulder. "Well, you do now. Come on inside. We've got food, a warm bed, and people who care." The boy hesitated, then nodded slowly. Jake led him into the center, feeling a deep sense of purpose. This was what the Reeves Hope Center was all about, giving kids a second chance. Keanu's surprise visit. A few weeks later, Jake was in his office when his assistant rushed in, eyes wide. "Jake, you're not going to believe this." Jake raised an eyebrow. "What's going on?" She grinned. "Keanu's here." Jake immediately got up and walked toward the entrance. Sure enough, there was Keanu Reeves, standing casually in jeans and a leather jacket, chatting with some of the kids. The moment he saw Jake, his face lit up. "Jake!" Keanu greeted him with a warm hug. "Man, this place looks amazing." Jake chuckled. "Well, we had a good start thanks to you." Keanu looked around, taking in the sight of kids laughing, playing and studying. This is incredible, Jake. You really made this happen." Jake smiled, then turned and gestured to the young boy he had met on the steps a few weeks ago. "Hey, Tommy, come meet someone special." The boy walked over, looking up at Keanu curiously. "Who's this?" Keanu knelt down to his level, extending a hand. "Just a guy who believes in second chances." Tommy shook his hand, still unsure of what was happening. Jake ruffled the boy's hair. "Keanu helped me when I was in your shoes, and now I get to help you." Keanu smiled proudly. "And one day, maybe you'll do the same for someone else." Tommy looked between the two of them, then gave a small smile, the first real one Jake had seen on his face. The ripple effect of kindness. That night after Keanu had left, Jake sat in his office, reflecting on everything that had happened. He had once been a homeless boy on the streets, lost and hopeless. Now he was running a center that was saving lives, and all of it had started with a single act of kindness. Jake realized something powerful. Kindness isn't just something you give, it's something that grows, something that spreads, something that creates a legacy. And this was just the beginning. The end, or perhaps another new beginning. Would you like me to continue with more twists, or do you think this is a good place to wrap it up? Homeless boy shows kindness to Keanu Reeves. The next day, his life changes forever. Part 5, a full circle moment. Months passed, and the Reeves Hope Center became a beacon of hope for homeless youth across the city. Stories of the shelter's impact spread like wildfire, and donations poured in from people who believed in the mission. Jake, once a lost boy on the streets, was now leading a movement that was changing lives. But the biggest surprise was yet to come. An unexpected invitation. One afternoon, Jake was finishing up paperwork when his phone buzzed. It was a text from Keanu. "Hey kid, got a special event next week. You're coming. No excuses." Jake chuckled and replied, "What kind of event?" Keanu's response was immediate. "Just be there. Suit up." Curious, Jake followed the instructions. A week later, he found himself standing in front of a grand hotel ballroom, wearing a borrowed suit. He adjusted his tie nervously as he stepped inside. The room was filled with Hollywood's biggest stars, philanthropists, and business moguls. It was a charity gala, one of the biggest in Los Angeles. Jake turned and saw Keanu approaching, grinning. "Glad you made it." Jake looked around, wide-eyed. "Keanu, what is this?" Keanu patted his shoulder. "Tonight's event is to raise money for the Reeves Hope Center." Jake's jaw nearly dropped. "Wait, this is for the center?" Keanu nodded. "People need to hear your story, Jake. They need to see what real change looks like." Before Jake could process what was happening, Keanu led him to the stage. The host smiled as he took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special guest tonight, a young man whose story represents the very reason we're here. Please welcome Jake Mitchell." The crowd erupted into applause. Jake's heart pounded as he stepped up to the microphone. He had never spoken in front of so many people before. He took a deep breath and looked at Keanu, who gave him an encouraging nod. Then he spoke. "I used to be just another homeless kid on the streets, forgotten, invisible. I thought my life was over, but one night a stranger showed me kindness." Jake glanced at Keanu, who smiled humbly. "That small act of kindness changed everything. It gave me hope, and now I get to do the same for others. I get to remind kids that they're not forgotten, that someone believes in them." His voice grew stronger. "We can't change the past, but we can change someone's future. And sometimes all it takes is a little kindness." The room was silent for a moment. Then applause thundered through the ballroom. People stood clapping, some even wiping away tears. Jake stepped back, overwhelmed, as Keanu pulled him into a hug. "Proud of you, kid," he whispered. "A legacy is born." That night, the gala raised over $5 million for the Reeves Hope Center. With the funds, Jake and Keanu expanded their work, opening more shelters, offering scholarships, and even starting a mentorship program to help kids find jobs and careers. Jake never forgot where he came from. Every night, he walked through the center, sitting with the kids, listening to their stories, just like Keanu had once done for him. One evening, a young boy named Aaron tugged at his sleeve. "Jake?" the boy asked. "Do you think I'll ever have a real home?" Jake knelt beside him, smiling. "Aaron, you already do. And one day, when you're ready, you're going to help someone else find theirs. Because kindness wasn't just something you gave. It was something that lived on, forever. The end, or the beginning of something greater." What do you think? Should we explore even more? Maybe a deeper look into Jake's future or another twist? Chasha, homeless boy shows kindness to Keanu Reeves. The next day, his life changes forever. Part 6. A new chapter begins. Years had passed since Jake first met Keanu on that cold night outside the diner. Now, in his late 20s, he had built the Reeves Hope Center into a nationwide movement with shelters in multiple cities, providing thousands of homeless children with opportunities they never thought possible. But life had a way of surprising him again. An unexpected visitor. One evening, as Jake was reviewing plans for a new shelter expansion, his assistant knocked on his office door. "Jake, there's someone here to see you." Jake glanced up. "Who is it?" She hesitated. "He says his name is Daniel Mitchell." Jake's entire body stiffened. He hadn't heard that name in over a decade. His father. His mind raced. The man who had abandoned him after his mother's death. The man who had disappeared without a word. Why now? Taking a deep breath, Jake stood and walked into the lobby. Sitting there, looking much older and worn down, was his father. Their eyes met. "Jake," his father said, his voice filled with guilt. "You probably don't want to see me, but I had to find you." Jake crossed his arms. "Took you long enough," Daniel sighed. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I heard about what you've done, the shelters, the kids you've helped. I saw you on TV at the gala." He swallowed hard. "And I realized I left you when you needed me the most." Jake clenched his jaw. The old anger bubbled up, but so did something else, something unexpected. Empathy. He had spent his life teaching kids about second chances. Was he strong enough to offer one himself? "Why are you here?" Jake finally asked. Daniel lowered his head. "I don't have much left, son. I messed up my life. I drank too much, ran from my problems, and ended up with nothing. But I wanted to tell you that I'm proud of you, and I'm sorry." The words hit Jake harder than he expected. For years he had imagined this moment, what he would say, how he would unleash years of hurt. But now, standing there, all he could feel was pity for the broken man in front of him. Jake sighed, then motioned toward the door. "Come on, let's get you something to eat." Daniel looked up, shocked. You'd do that?" Jake shrugged. "Someone once showed me kindness when I didn't deserve it. Guess it's my turn." As they walked toward the diner, the same diner where Jake had met Keanu all those years ago, Jake felt something shift inside him. Maybe kindness wasn't just about helping strangers. Maybe it was about healing old wounds too. The call that changed everything. A week later, Jake was in his office when his phone rang. It was Keanu. "Hey kid," Keanu said, his voice warm. "Got a new idea." Jake grinned. "Oh boy, what is it this time?" "I want to make a movie." Jake laughed. "Aren't you always making movies?" Keanu chuckled. "Yeah, but this one's different. I want to tell your story." Jake's breath caught. "What? Think about it. A kid on the streets, a chance encounter, how kindness changes a life. People need to see this." Jake hesitated. "Keanu, I don't know. This isn't about me." Keanu's voice softened. "No, Jake, it's about hope, and the world could use more of it." Jake leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. Maybe Keanu was right. Maybe this was just the beginning of something even bigger. A story that would inspire the world. And so the movie was made. A film about a young homeless boy who met a stranger one night, only to realize that the smallest act of kindness could change the world. The film premiered a year later, with Jake and Keanu standing side by side on the red carpet. Theaters were packed, audiences moved to tears, and most importantly, donations to the Reeves Hope Center skyrocketed, allowing Jake to expand shelters across the country. As he stood in the theater watching his life unfold on the big screen, Jake turned to Keanu and grinned. "This is crazy." Keanu smiled back. Life's crazy, kid, but sometimes the best stories are the ones you never see coming. Jake exhaled, feeling a deep sense of peace. His journey had started on the streets. But now, he was helping rewrite the future for thousands of kids, one act of kindness at a time. And the best part? This was only the beginning. The end, or maybe just the next chapter. How do you feel about this ending? Do you want to expand it further, maybe explore Jake's future even more?